However, I said to her, you know what? What if we let the weapons inspectors into Montana? What would they find? And see, we have such a duality in this country right now. We are amassing more and more nuclear weapons, and Trump just got out of the deal with Russia, and so now we're going to be on a fast track to build even more. Meanwhile, and we have to realize these little countries, you know, they're worried about us. Who would look like the biggest terrorist nation? We have those missiles aimed at Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and Russia and Bolivia, all over the world. And so we have to look in our own backyard in the context of this. And we have to start, I believe, just like with nuclear power, we need to incrementally start to phase those missiles out on a unilateral basis, whether Russia is going to do it or not. I interviewed a priest. He's been arrested at the SAC base up in Nebraska 25 times so far for protesting. Then what he said to me was, he goes, Joe, you know what, if we started to disarm on our own, did the right thing and trusted God, you don't think that he would keep us protected? And I know that that sounds Pollyannish, but when you look at it, we just spend $50 billion a year maintaining our nuclear arsenal. Think about, you got 24,000 people starving to death every day. And so to tie that into my foreign policy, David, we need to start to look at, as the ASP calls us to do, the common good across the spectrum, not just for us, but in the world. And so in just one little vignette from my foreign policy, which is about 20 pages long on our website, is that we would ask the American public to get behind initiatives to cut back the nuclear weapons and take those savings and bomb the rest of the world with charity, so that these little kids don't need to continue to starve to death. And so that's the essence of the foreign policy, and I can talk about it from a bunch of different angles, and maybe I will if there's a lull in the questions, but that should give you a feel, David, a bit about where I'm coming from.
Right. The next question is back to James Hanning. Joe, how will you help spark local ASP groups in the course of your campaign?
Just did that, James. Actually, there is a guy in Ohio that probably everybody knows at this point, William Campbell, and he came up with this pelicans and pancakes thing, which I think offshoot-wise, like we could do pelicans and pizza, and somebody suggested pelicans and pints or whatever. But what's so good about his idea is that it goes into a region, brings some people together. Not a lot at this point, but it's a start. And from that nucleus, you can, number one, from the meeting, you can generate press. We just generated some press from one of the meetings up by Toledo. And so how you would start to do that is that in each state, these pelican and pancake things could happen. You'd bring people together for these kind of meetings and others. And then Amar is a big proponent for using the internet in order to bring people together as well. And I'm not opposed to that at all. But I think sometimes face-to-face helps with the connectedness, so to speak. And so when we had that meeting up in Perrysburg, for instance, the Grody family, were a lot more invested in the party at that point. They had been involved, but they'd kind of been away for a while. It's kind of like right now there's this lag before the presidential race, so to speak, in the party, where there's not enough inertia at this point. And so there needs to be some precipitating factors to drive that. And I think these meetup things are an excellent idea and a good template for every state in the country in order to start to mobilize that more. Hope that answers your question, Jim.
All right, thank you. And the next question, again, you were here actually this morning or early this afternoon. It is birthday boy Matthew Bartko asking, should abortions be criminalized? And if yes, who should be punished and how?
Okay, well, on that one, and I was there this afternoon too and heard that question too, Matthew. And my thing is this. The American Solidarity Party says this in its platform, and I'll read it verbatim. From the moment of conception to natural death, every human is entitled to protection under the law. Okay? So, what does that mean? That means that from an embryo on, it's a human being. And so, in the case of abortion, and this afternoon, some things were brought up around incest and rape, etc. I was down in Ocala, Florida, Matthew, and I was standing with a group in solidarity protesting in front of an abortion clinic. And this one guy, he'd been down there doing that for 19 years. And he said to me, Joe, he said, I've heard a lot of really good reasons, whether it's poverty or it's rape or it's incest, for abortion. But he said, you know what? No reason has trumped killing an innocent human being. So, as far as how I look at the criminalization, is easy for me to say. Let me say that again. Criminalization. How I look at that, Matthew, is that number one, the doctors are culpable, but what you got right now is a bunch of sort of half pro-life politicians who are saying that, well, the mother's not culpable at all. I was in Zanesville, Ohio. Some guy came up to me at a coffee shop. He found out I was running for president. We were talking about different stuff, and this was one of them. He was very pro-life, against abortion. He said, Joe, he goes, abortion is just like, say, for instance, you got an 8-year-old kid in your room, and your mom and dad decide, we're going to kill the kid. And so they hire somebody to come into the house, take a gun, and shoot the kid. Under the law, again, to go back to ASP terminology, who would be culpable in that legally? And it's the exact same thing with this. The mother and the father should also be legally culpable. The reason why people aren't saying that for the most part is because they want votes, not because it's wrong or not because it's right, because it's not right. Everybody is culpable in that situation. And if you take that one step further, society is culpable because we become so narcissistic that we won't reach out to help more women in crisis pregnancy. Part of our traveling, we researched a whole lot of safety nets across the country that if you plugged them into every county in the country, there would be this huge safety net to help women in crisis pregnancy across the board. Just as one example, we were down in, where was that? Oh, actually, no, Ocala, Florida as well, at the Maria Goretti House. And this church down there, Our Lady Queen of Peace, they took the rectory and changed it. And this was a priest down here, God bless him. They changed it around and made it a home for unwed mothers in crisis pregnancy. And on top of that, the whole church community formed a cocoon around these people in order to help them, not only during those 9 months, but long into the future. And so if there needs to be an onus on anybody, the onus actually should be on us not helping more in this particular situation. And God knows there's a lot of stuff wrong with society that's precipitating, leading to that as well. But so that's my take, and maybe not that popular, but I mean, common sense says, well, so the parents aren't culpable and all of that, which I totally disagree with.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And then the next question, so this is a longer one. It's the same question that Marianne asked Brian earlier, and if you remember, but let me read it to the people who weren't here this afternoon. The convention delegates are using the 2016 platform as baseline. I prefer the 2017 platform planks with respect to economics, and am concerned about an overly radical move economically. In the 2016 platform, it says, we propose to shift the burden of property tax from buildings and improvements to ground rents. Ground rents refers to money you pay as a leaseholder for use of land one doesn't own. What is your opinion regarding the role of private property, including ownership of land, in our country? Would you agree with a shift in moving from private ownership of land to state ownership or control of land?
Okay. It's not a very easy one, Marianne. I can deal with this particular question in overarching constructs, I guess, is the best way to approach this. Number one, I'm totally 100% in line with the ASP's take on distributism and subsidiarity. And so part of what we've researched are a bunch of initiatives across the country in order to bring that back, because we move further and further and further into a corporate society that is about conglomerates at this point. And so to talk about Wisconsin, we were up in, what was the name of that? So they blur for me after a while, and I want to say Platteville. Maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But I was up in Platteville, Wisconsin, and spent a couple days. They were doing a whole downtown revitalization project with 5 different points. And what they were doing was they were doing seminars in order to educate the general populace in Platteville about how important it was to buy locally. Business owners were moving above their shops so that Main Street was becoming like their front yard. So they were way more vested in fixing it up and making it presentable and attracting people to come down there. And so from a business perspective, we'd like to see a tremendous resurgence of mom and pop shops and these downtown revitalizations and small family farms coming back and that kind of thing. As far as private property, how that ties in, Marianne, for me, is that, again, to go back to subsidiarity and distributism, is that we think that across the board there should be a lot more ownership, individual ownership, so that the state would come in to take land. It would need to, the eminent domain would need to be, the rationale for coming in and taking the land would have to really be, I think, a pretty strong reason to do that. And again, that would vary from municipality to municipality. And so I'm not trying to dodge that, Marianne. I just, the particulars of the second part of that I'm a little unfamiliar with. So I'm going to need to pass after that particular thing. I'm going to yield my time to somebody else. So. Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering if anyone was going to ask these kind of more fun questions. So this is Kyle. If you could meet with the Pope or go to the Super Bowl and watch the Browns, used to do it.
This year? Kyle, this year, and I love Francis, I really do, but I've been praying to Baker Mayfield now for a while. And Amar, where did you go?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I thought the thing shut up. Yeah, I actually, in all sincerity, and it was funny. I was in a little church in Ada, Ohio this afternoon, and I was praying, and there was a picture of Pope John Paul II on the wall. And if you guys are familiar with the liaison that was between Pope John Paul II and Reagan in order to end communism, it's a pretty phenomenal story as far as the behind the scenes things that happen to orchestrate that. Really phenomenal. And I actually, because of my platform and simplicity and again, a lot of stuff in line with the common good, I actually think the synergy between myself, without sounding really egotistical, Jim, the synergy between myself and Pope Francis could help the world tremendously. As far as moving it more in a direction of the common good. Because if you read my platform, it's like, I think St. Francis would vote for me. We were out in Wyoming, and we were being interviewed by a newspaper in Cheyenne, a reporter who happened to be Catholic, and I didn't know that. And he was asking the platform, I explained it to him, and he stopped, and he looked at me, and he goes, you know what? This is the kind of platform that a Jesuit priest would run on. So yeah, I love to see the Pope. I also am a huge Browns fan. And I actually, with the Ohio strategy I've been talking about online, I think that would help me carry Ohio as just being a Browns fan. So that's my answer, Kyle. Kind of mixed, sort of a political answer there.
Okay, thanks. And then the next question is from Matthew again. What do you see as the pros and cons of universal basic income?
Okay. Yeah, I see it in the short term, Matthew, especially.
Online. Sorry. I think that would help. Okay.
Okay. Um, I see it, Matthew, in two lights. One, I actually think it might be necessary in the short term with the way that our society is going to more and more mechanization, but I don't think that that's right for a minute. I think that we need to go, this came up this afternoon, I think we need to go back to a lot more apprenticeship programs. I think that we need to value the trades a whole lot more than we do right now. And I think that that needs to happen within the context of local production for local consumption. So there's that level that I think needs to move there. I also think we need to go back to an agrarian-based society that does a lot more organic growing, which would be labor intensive, and that would create a lot of jobs for people as well. I think a strong back to the land movement is extremely important, especially right now with all the corporate farms and the toxic chemicals we're putting on those corporate farms. We're going in such a tremendous wrong direction when it comes to farming in America right now. And so again, short term, the UBI may be in order to help some people on the margins, but in the long term, we need to affect a paradigm shift that creates a lot more life-giving, productive jobs in this country.
All right, thank you. The next question's got several different parts here, so I'll break it down. It's from James Hanning again. Marriage, I'd argue, is a 2-in-1 flesh union that is open to life. How is marriage so understood critical for advancing the common good?
Well, and this has come up for me a number of times within the context of the party. And again, to go back to the party platform, because I think one of the best, most cogent, to the point sentences in the platform is about marriage. And it says the belief is that there should be norms of monogamy, sexual exclusivity, and permanence. And so in the context of that, Jim, everything revolves around dignity of the human life, valuing the family unit. It's a pretty clear-cut statement that I agree with 100%. And in my particular case, very much ties in with my own personal faith. And so as far as promoting it, I think that people of our ilk, so to speak, need to stand up and be more vocal, especially when it comes to kids, and teaching alternatives to them in the context of public school systems. And we really need to speak up. I think the ASP, one of the things that drives me nuts about the party to a degree is that the ASP, in my belief, has by far the best platform around across the board. I would argue that it's God's platform. And so I don't think we need to treat the principles with kid gloves. I think we need to be as vocal as possible about them, as assertive as possible about them, as strong. And so in this particular case, I think that there needs to be more of a defense of marriage. We need to actually, to go back to the Browns thing, and hopefully that happens with the Browns this year, we need to go on the offensive a whole lot more about these issues, as opposed to sitting back and just timidly talking about stuff and waiting for the backlash or being afraid to say anything.
Okay, good. So that answers the first question. It's a 3-part question.
Oh, okay.
I was listening to see if you would have kind of just answered it in even loose terms, but I think you might want to answer it specifically. So what is the state's role with regard to marriage?
Okay, like, is he asking what it is now, or
no? I think he's implying, what it should be
Oh, okay, right, sure,
yeah,
sure, yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's kind of mixed. It's kind of like abortion. You take what we've done right now is the churches have taken a whole lot of nonprofit status money, so to speak, which has become blood money, and have taken some of their voice out of politics. I think the same with marriage. What's happened is that the state has stepped in, and we're seeing these laws coming out of the Supreme Court that, and you hear that about Obergefell, no, it's settled law, so we shouldn't deal with it anymore. And I think that that's wrong, number one. But two, I think that taking marriage out of the state purview and putting it in the context of churches might be a real good way to go, because what happens is you get this yin and yang thing where then, okay, you get some benefits because you're married, so to speak, but then you're tied to some of the legal ramifications in the society. Again, just like a nonprofit status with the church, and the priests or the bishops will hide behind, well, we can't get political with this. And so it's kind of mixed, Jim, and I need to think a little bit more about that particular question. It's the best I can answer right now on that. And then what was the third part?
Well, here comes the third part. So that might be another one that it says, does same-sex marriage undercut marriage?
Well, it undercuts what the ASP talks about as far as the norms. And I think it undercuts myself personally. I believe, as again, my church believes, that natural law is one man and one woman. And so that forms the nucleus of the nuclear family, in my belief. And so when you have another paradigm, well, of course, it would undercut, I think, God's design for marriage and family. And I don't think for a minute, and this is more average Joe, common sense vernacular, is that it's kind of like with the transgender stuff right now. Okay, so what did God do? He sent somebody to the earth and then said to himself, nuts, I screwed up on that. Actually, I meant to make him a girl. I mean, at this point, I heard somebody say that with the transgender stuff, we will look back, especially with kids, we'll look back 20 years from now when we're doing stuff like cutting out private parts and rearranging physiology. We'll look at that the way that we look at lobotomies in the last century. So, yeah, I mean, I think, Jim, that these new alternatives are indeed undercutting God's design for what marriage is supposed to be all about.
All right, thanks. And that the next question is, and before I go to the next question, I want to remind people, some people came in a little bit later. I was thinking, if you'd like to ask your question verbally, please type verbal somewhere in your question, and I will engage your microphone so you can actually read it to Joe yourself. All right, so this question is from Tai Chi. It says, hi, Joe. As a career drug and alcoholism counselor, what would your administration's approach be towards the war on drugs? And what is your stance regarding the legalization of marijuana and potentially other drugs?
Okay. And Tai Chi, I just want to say I appreciate you taking Saturday night off from karate and fencing in order to be here tonight. So as far as, and thanks for not asking me about the suit. As far as what I think on the war on drugs is right now, and I'll just give you one vignette of my belief. We went down to the border. We've done 3 border tours and spent a lot of time looking at that issue from every angle, including the influx of drugs. And I interviewed this guy in New Mexico who is a sheriff's deputy that's been in on a whole lot of cocaine busts and that kind of thing with, you know, a huge amount of drugs in these semis coming across. And he said to me, he goes, Joe, the only thing that we're kind of missing in this war on drugs is, he said, what we forget, and this is common sense, is that we, i.e. America, is creating the demand for the drugs in this country. And so he said, yeah, I'm a sheriff's deputy, and during the day I do that. He said, Joe, you know what I do on the side? And I said, oh, what's that? And he said, I'm a DARE program officer. I go into the schools and try and warn kids about getting involved with drugs in the first place. So part of the war on drugs, Tai Chi for me would start with educational programs, and it's akin to, remember, everybody smoked in America, but through a whole series of things over an extended period of time, not as many people smoke. Actually, it's diminished exponentially. Well, part of my war on drugs would be to ramp up treatment. It would be to ramp up prevention. That's, I think, the most sane way to come at it. And right now, the other thing is that the DEA has about 68 different offices internationally. And that is in order to help these other countries to work on drug enforcement down there. Well, under my administration, there would be a lot more of those in order to help these people more. Because again, the people in Latin America, as an example, are in this maelstrom right now of drug cartel violence. But again, where's the drug cartels getting the money in order to subsidize what they're doing? They're getting it from us. And so, of course, we have a responsibility, i.e. the common good, to do something to help them in tandem with this other part. And Tai Chi, I forgot the last. Amar, what was the last part of the question?
It was about legalization of marijuana and other drugs.
Okay.
Other drugs.
Right. I would be totally against the legalization of marijuana. I think that, except for perhaps medical purposes, I think what we're doing right now is we would be introducing yet another substance legally, which is happening to a degree right now, into our society that has the potential for more addiction, more broken homes, a whole lot more incarcerations. Right now, 80% of the people incarcerated are there because of either drugs or alcohol, either because they were addicted or they were doing something in order to get drugs. And so and again, to go back to the popes, actually Pope Francis came out and said he was totally against the legalization of marijuana anywhere in the world. And I happen to be in the same boat because as an addictions counselor, I've seen not only how that has wreaked havoc on a person individually, but how it ripples through the family and it creates a whole lot of societal problems, which we don't look at too much. We're always putting Band-Aids on the symptoms as opposed to endemically looking at what's causing it at its roots. And this is part of it.
All right. So then I'm going to jump over to our Facebook Live viewers and voting members. Some people have not joined the webinar, which is fine. They're just watching on Facebook Live. There's a 15-second delay, so they're going to see this a little bit later than right now. But they have some questions they've posted there, so I'll bring some of them in. Let's see here. The first one is from Bob Moorhead. It says, Northeast Ohio suffered 2 instances of white power racial violence within a scant 18 hours. Would you like to hit for us again how your administration would heal the festering racial wounds in the United States?
Sure. And hi, Bob. I hope Barberton beats Massillon this fall. That's an inside joke for anybody who's outside of Ohio. As far as, we're right now, like you're looking at the racial divide and on top of that with the mass shootings. But what we're not looking at, again, it's kind of like with the drug deal, is we're not looking at the endemic part of this. Today in America, without any fanfare or press, 8 youth were shot to death in our cities. Every day, 8 youth are shot to death. Why we're so concerned right now about the mass shootings and the racial divide and all that is because now some of those AK-47 shootings are happening out in our suburbs. See, as long as they're going on in the city, out of our view, no big deal, huh? So our program, Bob, for this, and I've traveled the country extensively talking to people, is number one, we think there needs to be a Marshall Plan for America, for America's inner cities. Just like what we did in Europe after World War II. We need to rebuild the cities. We need to have urban planning that, as an example, we went down to New Orleans and we toured a bunch of different neighborhoods that started up after Hurricane Katrina. What they did was, through urban planning, was they put higher end homes next to middle class homes, next to poorer homes. what they did in essence was start to create solidarity between the poor and other socioeconomic stratas from doing that. And we could do that in every city. And on top of that, we went to Wichita, Kansas, and researched a thing called Go Zones. Then you would take those cities and you would cordon them off into small 15 radius block towns. They'd be like small towns within the city. And what they did in Wichita through the Ecumenical Society there has twinned the churches in the outlying suburbs with the inner city churches in order to do a whole lot more outreach and to help a lot, again, to create a lot of solidarity. And then on top of that, I think you can overlay like the Brady campaign for gun control, and you can bring in like longer background checks and getting rid of, I think assault weapons need to go. I know, Bob, you and I disagree on that. But I think that we're looking at this in a one-dimensional monolithic way as opposed to looking at it in a very systemic way where we need to deal with, see, we've left these people trapped in these inner cities. And we've also left people trapped in their minds because we haven't prioritized mental health care. Rosalind Carter was a big proponent of that, but in recent years, that is not prioritized on the same level as physical health. So, so that's kind of my answer, Bob, in a general way to that one.
Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna go, John Maydi is in, and he's got, he actually is willing to go verbal. So let me see if I can find his thing here. And so, John, if you're ready, we're gonna try this out. Oh, no. Okay, so it tells me, John, that you're using an older version of Zoom. So, unfortunately, I can't get you to go verbal. You'll have to download a newer version of Zoom. So, for the future reference. But I'll ask your question. It's written out here very nicely. So, it says, this is John's question. So, John, do you really think people take opioids or heroin because of a lack of education? Or are these signs of a despair with a system that has totally failed them? It seems to me that these are two different sets of causes. And there's a second part. Oh, no, sorry. This is a full question. So hold on one second. We are experiencing an explosion of deaths of despair, alcohol, drugs, suicide. I don't think they are due to a lack of education. Indeed, the election of Trump is a kind of expression of mass despair.
John, I told you before this not to ask me a real hard one. At least it's not an economic terminology I don't understand. Anyway, yeah, I think, again, to go back to being a drug and alcohol counselor, I think that the opioid crisis there's a root cause to that. And part of what we're looking at right now is, yeah, there's societal despair. I mean, when you look at a society right now, to go back to, there's 8 youth being shot to death. There's 100,000 people that are killed in America every day right now. The divide between the rich and the poor continues to grow. People are trapped in these inner cities and in rural poverty loops. So yeah, societally, we're not living in the most, for lack of better phraseology, happy place anymore. So that's number one. But two, and this is more of the systemic individual part, John, is that part of what I did was work not only with addictionology, but also with these dysfunctional family systems. So if you got kids growing up in homes where parents are addicted, and not just addicted to drugs and alcohol, they're addicted to sex, or they're addicted to TV or the internet, or addicted to gambling. I mean, our society is replete with addiction right now. Is kids grow up in homes where they're shorted emotionally, there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And so what happens to them internally is they have a whole lot of voids in their psyche, so to speak. And so what they do is they repeat the same cycle that their parents are, only it's just like the flu strain. The next cycle gets worse. And so the opioids, drugs, are a way to escape some of the internal pain that's going on. Now, this one's not an easy answer either, but at some point we need to stop to prioritize, again, the mental health system and get people the kind of systemic internal help that they need in order to not turn to these other addictions. Now, that won't play real well in Peoria right now, but if we get to the point where we start hitting the bottom, and I don't know what society needs to take in order to hit a bottom, in between global warming, 4,000 babies being killed every day, these mass shootings, the inner city violence. I mean, you think we would be at the apex of hitting the bottom, but apparently the elevator hasn't hit the bottom floor yet, John. So hopefully it does sooner than later. And my message, because I'm probably the only presidential candidate out there talking about some of the root causes that I think are right on target, actually, but just hard for people to hear.
All right, thank you, Joe, and thanks, John. I'm trying to balance some questions. Got some great question askers. They have they've asked several questions, and I will get to those as well. But we're going to go to Bonnie Callis. She asks, "What changes would you advocate for our educational system?"
Okay, yeah, that's another one of those. We spent 20 years traveling the country researching alternative education systems because we think right now that that's another category where we're going wrong in a lot of areas. Not all, by a long shot. I mean, look at Amar. He's probably one of the best math teachers in Illinois. But I'm just trying to get your vote, Amar. You know what I'm saying? So typical politician.
Yep.
So anyway, to go back to just as one example, like some came up this afternoon as far as secondary education and how like some people don't need secondary education in order to make it in the work world. And if we went to more apprenticeship programs and we prioritize trades more, that could change. But we went to Antioch College, which is probably the most liberal college on the planet, not just in the United States, but on the planet. But they had this really great, what was called work-study program. And what happened was kids went there and they would go for a semester in their major, and then the college had all these liaisons set up around the country where they would go out and then do an internship for a semester. Then they would come back, go to another semester of classes, but then they would go out and work the following semester again. They did that for 4 years. How much money is wasted, as an example, of some kid who goes through school for 4 years, gets out, gets in a job in their major, and within 6 months says, gee, I don't like this. You know, and so we think that there needs to be more leeway for upper education, as an example, Bonnie, to incorporate these kind of programs. Also, we went to the heart of Cleveland. We actually lived there for 5 years in order to do outreach to help people down there. And one of the things we researched is the Urban Community School down there, which won a bunch of awards. Wonderful place. What they do is they have people who bring their kids in from the suburbs to sit side by side with the kids in the inner city. What that does, like, because right now I am such not a proponent of charter schools. And the reason why is this. I interviewed a principal out in Washington, and he said, Joe, here's what's going on with the charter deal. He goes, so we're struggling as it is with these schools, and then the cream of the crop is taken and put in another venue, leaving the other kids abandoned. Very analogous to white flight in the cities. What did we do? People, as we got more well off, we moved away from those on the margins in order to have more comfortable lifestyles out in the suburbs. And so we would promote that kind of thing. We also believe in very strongly, when I was at Antioch, actually, there was a teacher there. She taught education, and they were studying a lab project out in Rhode Island. And what they did with the lab project was each kid was assigned a teacher, a counselor, 2 people in the community, like in the business community, that were close to what the kid was interested in, parents, and a neighbor. And they created what they called these care teams around the kid for the whole duration of high school. What that did was not only help the kid, but it also interconnected the community back into the school. Because you know how it goes, like kids, they go through school, they get out, and then the parents or the people in the community aren't vested anymore in the school. Well, this way they are. And so those are just like 3, 4 things, Bonnie, that we've researched, but we have a whole template based on 20 years of looking at alternative projects that if you plugged them all into the school system, you would evoke a whole lot more of quote unquote ASP, common good for the common people, especially the common kids. So yeah, so that would be my answer to that.
And Bonnie had a follow-up. I think you covered it. You spoke about college education first, and she said, "What about K through 12?" But I think you did cover that pretty well in your extended answer. So, we go to the next question. This is actually 2 people asked a similar question. Kyle asks, "Who are some of your inspiration in regards to your potential presidency?" And also, Jeremy Miller earlier asked, "Who in your mind was our best president, and what did you like about him, and what would you do differently?" So I guess we combine those into one answer.
Sure. Yeah, on one level, I thought the best president, and he actually became the best president after he got out of office, was Jimmy Carter. And the reason why is because he didn't go around and give these $400,000 talks on Wall Street and that kind of thing. What he did was he went out into the world. He's got the Carter Foundation down in Atlanta. We visited that, did some research down there. And what he's done is mobilize all this help internationally, parlaying his profile with these projects. And I can give you one example, and this is just great with him, is we're down at a place called Jubilee Partners, down in, it's in a small town in Georgia. Like I said, they blur for me sometimes. But anyway, the guy that runs this Jubilee Partners, they take immigrants from around the world, and they have a camp there where they help them with the initial phase of assimilation before they go out into wherever they're going. And it's just an absolutely wonderful thing. But Don Moser is the guy's name, and he runs it. Listen to this. This is just absolutely fascinating about Carter. You know, so there was a question earlier about Iran and what I would do with Iran. And what I do with Iran was mobilize a whole lot more of what Carter did. Moser said him and Carter and a couple other people involved with Habitat for Humanity quietly on their own set up this thing where they took some planes over to North Korea and started building Habitat for Humanity homes in the north part of North Korea. What we forget about North Korea is that it's extremely poverty-stricken. And so there's a Bible edict that many of us kind of forget when we're looking at these international issues, and it's do good to those who would harm you. And Carter, he's still down in Plains doing these Sunday morning Bible studies in the morning before the service, and he believes in that, and he's living out that exhortation. And so as president, I would do the same kind of thing. I would follow those kind of models, as you probably have picked up at this point, that I wouldn't be politically correct. I would be, I'd be the president who, because global warming's a real thing, that the ASP happens to think so too, I wouldn't be taking those big gas guzzling limousines. I'd be showing up places on bicycles. I just bought an electric lawnmower for our house because of how much carbon that pumps into the air, because there's no pollution control stuff on the car. I'd be out on the White House lawn with my electric lawnmower going back and forth. Point being is that I happen to like presidents that walk the walk, so to speak. And Carter did that. Carter did that.
All right, good job, Joe. And then this is a kind of a follow-up to that, since you brought it up and it was a person's question. This is from Jeremy Miller. Also, what is the biggest threat to our environment today, and how will that threat be solved?
Sure, yeah. Jeremy, we are, at least in my estimation. To go back to the ASP platform, we support the scientific consensus that human beings are causing instability in the global climate. So what I talk about with this, in that research traveling that we did, we have researched at length all kinds of different wind turbine projects, all kinds of different wave action projects, and there should be a whole lot more off both coasts. We've researched geothermal, solar, that whole thing. There needs to be an amalgam of that with an exponent of 20. But on top of that, and this is me as president, I would say, Jeremy, that remember during World War II, what did we do? We quote unquote sacrificed for the war effort. Everybody got on board with that. Well, I don't know what the precipitating factor has to be, but I'll tell you, I'm running as a concerned parent, and I don't want my kids inheriting a world of climate chaos. And so I would, as president, ask the American public to sacrifice, because it's another war, only it's a war on the environment. And so as concerned parents, do we really want to do that to our kids? And so I would consider energy rationing in the short term until people got it about doing the right thing. Again, that wouldn't be the most politically expedient orientation, so to speak. But if you don't have a world, who cares? So somebody at some point, as you know, Time Magazine a couple of years ago, they said at some point there needs to be one politician who comes forward and tells the American public the truth instead of what they want to hear. I would happen to be that.
All right, thank you. The next question is from Matthew Bartko. Should we maintain a military capable of maintaining our current treaty obligations?
I think, Matthew, that we should maintain a military. But what we've looked at is we spend 17 times more the amount of money than the next 17 countries, not individually, but combined. Think about that. And that includes Russia and China. The United States spends 17 times more. Now, again, to go back to biblical principles, if I'm spending that much money on my protection, when I know there's 24,000 kids starving to death and over 1 million people that don't have access to clean drinking water, how is God going to look at that? So yeah, I think like I would remain a part of NATO, and I think what NATO does is good, but I think we need to scale back some of what we're doing in those areas in order to be as hyper protective. And also what's going on is with our military power, that also is used in coercive ways in order to benefit our own interests. You hear that all the time in foreign policy. And so I don't think that's the orientation God wants for America. And so, yeah, I believe in military, but not on this hyperdrive level we have it at this point.
All right. The next question is, it's going to go from Kyle again. So where do you stand on space initiatives?
Okay. Number one, to stay along the same lines as what I was talking about, Kyle, this Space Force that Trump has put in motion at this point, I for not a second believe in militarization of space. Not for a second. And so I told a newspaper down in Mississippi that we would be so opposed to that. I need to say, and so what are we going to do? We're going to go out and quote unquote conquer space. The other thing, and this is more common sense, and I kind of use this as an average Joe soundbite sometimes, but when you look at space, Kyle, you got no gravity, no oxygen, no water that we've seen except for maybe little drops on Mars, and no food. You think that that might be an indication that God doesn't want us there. The other thing is, okay, we're pumping, like I just watched Apollo 13 the other night and was pretty moved by that. It was kind of cool, actually. But when you think about it, we're pumping billions of dollars into the space program right now. When in going to other planets, we're on our planet right now. Again, people don't have access to clean drinking water. The air is polluted beyond belief at this point. the environmental degradation across the board is off the charts. But we're spending all this money on this program to go into space. What, to colonize Pluto at some point? We need to be taking that money right now and putting it into these kind of programs in order to help the poor, to help the environment across the board. Maybe someday later, when we have the luxury to explore whatever, that'd be okay. Although again, without the air, the food, and the oxygen, I'm kind of like, well, not so much. Anyway, that best.
Okay, we're going to jump back to the live question, like the Facebook Live from the voting members. From Bob Moorhead again, he says, a young diabetic man just died because he went to cheap insulin to try and pay for his wedding. Do you still think a piecemeal, community-free clinic approach is sufficient, or is it finally time to get aggressive with American healthcare?
Okay, Bob, I know, Bob, you and I had like some disagreements about that, but I don't think that calling our plan piecemeal is apt. I think that the ASP calls for, I go back to healthcare and what it says, a robust safety net around nutrition, clothing, shelter, healthcare. And we believe in hybrid systems in the state and national levels. And that's what our program promotes. We're talking about a regional system, but subsidized by tax money. And there could be an allocation of federal money as well pumped into it, depending on which administration is there and that kind of thing. But in combination, and that's the part of the hybrid system, we have gone all over the country looking at these subsystems that work really well to supplement what's already there. So as an example, Grand Junction, Colorado, they have the Marillac Hospital. This is a 2-story facility with volunteer doctors, volunteer nurses, volunteer citizenry that does janitorial, intake, filing, the whole deal. If you don't have health insurance in Grand Junction, Colorado, and you need major surgery, you can get it on a sliding fee scale for $5. That's not in and of itself the whole answer to healthcare. That's a supplement. We went down to Monroe, Louisiana, and we looked at a community pharmacy down there. Wonderful program. What happened was these people from actually the St. Vincent de Paul Society in the Catholic Church started this down there, but there's a whole lot of ecumenical help right now for that. What they do is, like, there's people that in the nursing homes that die. There's all this medication that's left over. It's the same with people that get over an illness and have this extra medication. People go around and they gather this. They also donate and they buy over-the-counter stuff, and they've created, and they have volunteer pharmacists. And so they've created this whole pharmacy in a town of 40,000 people, where if you don't have money for insulin, for instance, you can get it there through this program. And so I'm not, again, Bob, I'm not saying that that's an end-all in itself. I wouldn't take away the Medicare programs, and I wouldn't take away subsidies to the existing health system that's already there. So it's not, this is not a piecemeal system. It's a system that has more supplements. And on top of it, with those supplemental help, not only do the people that have the physical problems get help, but it creates more of an opportunity for people to volunteer in the community. And so the community comes closer together as well. And there's the spiritual benefit that, you know, sure, you can't quantify that, but most of the people in the party understand about volunteering and how you benefit from that spiritually. So I actually think that our healthcare plan is a good amalgam of all of that. And as an addendum, that if you heard healthcare in those debates, who was talking about prevention in that whole cadre of people? On both nights, nobody mentioned that once. But our healthcare plan, there's 1/3 of it is on prevention. Healthier diets. It's too bad Jonna's not here tonight, but healthier diets, exercise. People need access to those kind of things. Now, whether they use them or not is another thing, but we've researched a lot of different community programs that have come up to help more people have access to, like Silver Sneakers is a really good example for the elderly. So anyway, I could go on forever on this, Bob. But I understand your concern because I'm around people that have healthcare issues on a regular basis. My wife has had a number of them that we've had to deal with and pay for incrementally, and the whole. I mean, so it's not like just as an addendum, I'm probably the only presidential candidate. Before one of the campaign tours about 10 years ago, I busted my wrist playing basketball, really bad, and I went to the emergency room. The doctor said, Joe, there's a bunch of connecting bones that got broken. I can put a splint on it right now, but you need to go to an orthopedic surgeon on Monday and get an appointment to have surgery. And I looked at him and I said, you know what, would it heal just in the splint? And he said, the chances of that are about 95% no. But you know what? We didn't have the money and we were scheduled to go on the tour. And so I left and kept the splint on for 3 months and took it off. It took me almost 6 months to rehab that wrist. So when it comes to people being on a populist level, understanding about the concern around healthcare, and we got kids, and have sacrificed a lot to do the campaigning, and so our family has not had the best healthcare insurance over the years by a long shot. We kind of think God is doing that. I'm totally empathetic to people in tough situations when it comes to that. So anyway, with that, I'll yield to the next question.
Okay. All right. We'll go back to Matthew. Matthew Bartow says, there are still several states that deny sexual orientation as a protected class in regards to employment and or housing. How would your administration address this?
Yeah, Matthew, we don't believe in any kind of discrimination whatsoever when it comes to in the workplace or it comes to just being on the street, whatever that is. I don't believe for a minute about pushing that as a solid alternative lifestyle, but reciprocally, we don't in any way believe in discrimination of any sort when it comes to any of those venues.
Okay. Well, I think the question was, how would you address the states that still have, that deny sexual orientation? So as president, I think he's saying if it was a statewide law, what would you do to, I guess, speak to that state?
Well, the only thing that you could do is, you can do two things. One would be coercive. Okay, so you would withdraw some of the federal money until they change the law. But I believe in states' rights. And so if they have that paradigm in their state, the only thing that I could do that I think would be effective in any level is to use the presidency as a bully pulpit in order to generate more momentum around traditional marriage, family, that kind of thing, and also respect for anyone as far as discrimination goes. But you couldn't, as president, you couldn't impose some of your will on the states. Again, that happens, obviously, but in this particular case, I mean, I think it's a moral imperative not to discriminate.
Okay, and unless we get other questions, I think this is the last one I see here, and that's from Jeremy Miller. What do you think is the best solution to the evil of having only two parties, and how will this problem be solved?
I got that one, Jeremy. That we win the election this time. There is a core, and it's a small core at this point. And to go back to the Bible one more time, and I don't want to come across as a Bible thumper or anything along those lines, but I happen to read that a lot. And there's this thing called the Gideon's Army. And remember how God kept paring it down till there was just 300 really committed people. And look what happened. Jeremy, I believe strongly that this is God's platform, number one. So I don't think he's gonna let it lie fallow. However, it's like the loaves and fishes thing, where he could have done that on his own, but he decided to wait till somebody brought him a few loaves and some fishes. That's what I think. Instead of loaves and fishes, This is loaves and pelicans and pancakes. I mean, I should start a church. I really should start. So the Church of the ASP. But so I think if people there's people in the party, and I'm not trying to get your vote at this point, Amar, but there's these people that have this smart thing, as far as goals and the whole, although I think you should raise the bar on the goal thing a little bit, but as far as there's a really solid template for how to do this in a playbook. And the thing Amar is talking about with these smart things, I told Amar that my wife's does Stephen Covey stuff, so I know about goal setting until it's coming out of my whatever. But that's what needs to happen. We need to use our talents and our tools in each category and bring them together so that they congeal in such a way that then God can use that in order to multiply it exponentially. And so without sounding Pollyannish, I actually think God could do this. What might happen is that it's kind of like when John had asked about society and how bad it had to get. At what point does God allow society as a whole to hit a bottom? Just like an alcoholic who hits a bottom and then becomes very teachable. Well, I think if we keep being faithful, it's that Mother Teresa thing, we just keep being faithful and doing the next right thing within the context of this party, that sooner than later, God's going to multiply our efforts. So I think that's the best way to do it because, I've been around for a while, Jeremy, and done the whole kind of independent thing and have moved in a lot of different political circles. And here, every election, it's like the Green Party saying, well, this is the one, the Libertarian Party and the Constitutional Party. And that stuff doesn't happen. And number two, with them, they don't have the right platform, I don't think. Some areas, but not. And so I think we're the one it's going to happen with. But that's the only way to impact the system, Jeremy, is we're going to have to win. And I actually think we can do that. If I mention that Ohio strategy to anybody, in between when I'm not going to do the Browns games, I'm actually going to be out on the roads trying to mobilize more of that. Although I'm trying to lose weight and William's got me doing these pancakes, it's really been difficult. It's been a difficult kind of thing. So God sent Jana with the vegetarian deal or whatever it was. So that's it. Any more questions? Or?
Yeah, we do actually. Kyle jumped in with a great question. It's a twist on one that I asked Brian earlier. So how do you think the ASP, a Christian democracy party, can grow in an increasingly secularized country?
Okay. Yeah. And just in the way that I was just talking is that, yeah, we're moving more and more in a secular orientation, but that secular orientation is what's driving us further and further down the elevator shaft. So we, as just an example, and this is something nobody's talking about as a presidential candidate, but most of the people in the party have faith. So think about this. And that came up, Brian was talking about this a little bit yesterday, like video games and violence in the media and violence on the streets right now. If you continue to do secular things that are sinful, what does that do? It opens the door to the demonic. I mean, again, my particular faith teaches that's real, and that then starts to influence more and more negative behavior or sinful behavior, and the society spins further and further out of control because it's been inspired to spin further and further out of control. And so what I believe is that it's like what I've been talking about with these other issues. I think that we need to be, I don't think we need to disown our affiliation with Christian democracy. I think we need to declare it. And that doesn't mean that the party's not open to other people, but I think we need to be proud of it. And I think that we need to talk distinctly about it. And I think that we need to be a beacon. If you look at the early Christians, people were not converting because of what they were saying. These people were converting because they were watching those early Christians sacrifice their life for something that they believed in. Way beyond rhetoric, they were living the gospel message to the nth degree. And I think we need to do the same thing as a party. And so whether it's us moving into the inner city or Amar going down to do the soup kitchen thing with Tai Chi or whatever you guys are doing, is that that's the key. I think that that ultimately is owning our spirituality, living it out, and I think that's the key to bringing God the loaves and fishes. So I'm not in any way, I don't, again, if you've picked it up, I would not get the most votes right at this point, but I don't think what the ASP needs in the next 6 months is votes as much as exposure. And hopefully tangentially, the society will hit such a bottom. I mean, it's doing that right now. People are like flummoxed about this mass shooting. They don't know what to do, and it's scaring them tremendously. So who knows, maybe we'll spiral down to the point where the combination between the society hitting a bottom and us doing the right thing in the party will be just the right perfect storm, so to speak, to affect this win.
Okay, so we have a couple of recent questions that popped in here, and I just want to make sure we have an hour and 15 minutes. I don't want to, push it too much longer. I know we talked about this, like how long it was going to go. You want to answer a couple more, Joe, or we can always be these?
No, I am fine. Hold on 1 second, though. I just need to check with my technological person.
Okay.
Are you sleeping, Sydney? No. Are you doing okay? Hold on just a second.
Sure.
I want the rest of the membership to know, it's a long story. Here, take that. I think we're okay as far as that goes, but thank you so much for your help. Totally appreciate it. Okay, because I'm going to need you again. Okay. All right, take care, Sydney. All right, so obviously that doesn't happen during the debates.
Right.
But yeah, go ahead. So
okay.
Yeah. So I had to hire a technical consultant tonight, guys.
Yeah, no, but this is great. You got it working the first time. It's good.
Thanks, Sydney.
So here's a kind of a link to your last answer. This is from Bob. Go ahead again.
Yeah.
Says, can we reduce gun violence while still respecting the Second Amendment?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, Bob, I respect the Second Amendment, but it's kind of like life. It's like we found that the most prudent path is moderation. And so what I do respect the Second Amendment, but I don't think it's disrespectful to say, yeah, but like AK-47 should be on the street. I mean, I think that that's the moderation part where we need to look at some of that. But in combination, it's kind of like the healthcare stuff. In combination, there needs to be all the other stuff I was talking about, the mobilization of the help to the inner cities and society in general. That's really the root cause. So as you're doing that, if you cut back, again with the Brady campaign, they're looking at like longer background checks, and they're looking at updating some of the system that categorizes the guns and that kind of thing. So I think the combination of all of that would work. But if we just pick one thing, it won't work. And when we were doing that stream thing, Bob, and I know this is hard for you guys, like, because like I get to talk and you're not talking back to me, which I know you would, and I know I'll see that probably in the stream later tonight. But like the other part, and that's again to go back to the Pollyanna stuff. When we were going back and forth, Bob, there was a guy that I found. I Googled it, and that guy came up who I think he's in Philadelphia. He's somewhere in Pennsylvania, Matthew. But he's bought back guns in the neighborhood, and people have brought guns to him. And in his basement, he turns the guns into garden tools, plows into swords into plowshares. And obviously one guy, and there's probably maybe a few more, but we need to look to these guys as beacons who are trying to affect some kind of change in their neighborhoods. And so again, to go back to, I hate to keep using the word amalgam, but the amalgam of all of that stuff doesn't disrespect the Second Amendment, but it enhances the common good across the board in America, I believe. I don't think that it's one way or the other, where it's just like the gun lobby gets its way 100%. I just don't think that's the best way to go. So.
Okay, and the last one of these later questions came in here. This is from Jared Peterson. There has been a big push recently for such changes as abolishing the Electoral College and the Senate filibuster. What is your position on changes like these, and are they necessary?
Yeah, well, I'm just, it's funny. I work as a reporter for a couple newspapers here, and there's a guy at Ohio Northern University who has written a couple books, and he's been in Time Magazine and in the New York Times, and he has researched the Electoral College across the board. And based on the things I've read about the Electoral College, that there is a necessity to it from the standpoint of checks and balances in voting in America. Otherwise, the people in the bigger cities would just drown out rural America. And so it's kind of like the three branches of government in DC, and that the founders built into it those checks and balances. That's also the case, I believe, with the Electoral College. So even though it seems like, well, a winner should take all, and Clinton won by 3 million votes and that kind of thing, I don't think that's representative of America across the board. And I think that small town America and rural America should have a balanced say in what's going on in the country. And so the best I know, I think it's a system that, even though it seems to some convoluted, if you look below the surface a bit, I think it actually makes common sense.
All right, so that's the last question that we have, and I think it's been a great, hour and 20 minutes, great session. I thank you a lot for coming out and sharing your time and getting that tech figured out. I think hopefully more comfortable with how that's working. I enjoyed that, and I think there were a lot of people that showed up. I think the more we do it, the more other people, the party members, will get comfortable with it and really be aware of it, that we're doing these things. And so let's just see if we can maybe do another one of these less, one-on-one, they ask me anything kind of questions after the first debate. I think maybe people have follow-up questions that, after whatever you come up with in that session, may have interesting, afterthoughts that we can share. So I really appreciate your time.
I need to, as an addendum, and I should have said this at the beginning, sure. I appreciate you not playing the extra 9 holes tonight and being here to do this. I mean that. And I also actually feel good about how the technology thing went. And for those of you that are still online here, that cost me $40 tonight with Sydney. So I need campaign donations. So you guys send them to me. Don't send them to the National Committee. Send them to me. Just kidding. Just kidding. Thanks, Amar.
All right. Thanks, Joe. I'm going to shut this off, and I appreciate
everybody showing up.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right. See ya.